fig tree, and we also have a carob tree. And carobs you can only buy in stores around Tu B'Shvat time, from what I've been told. And so my question is, one, are we allowed to take the carobs from the tree? And if we do, how do we do Maaser on them? And the second question is, if we don't have permission, could we theoretically still take because of Peah, and then we don't have to do Maaser? And then could you take away our permission if that's the case, to have the carobs so that we can take via Peah and not have to get Maaser?
Yeah, so, well, let me answer the second question first, which I think is easier. B'zman hazeh, for various reasons, the minhag has become that we do not leave Peah for the poor in fields, even a religious farmer. Although the Vilna Gaon says the Chatchila, there would be such an idea, but l'maisa the minhag is not. And the Chazon Ish basically says that poor people don't. In other words, the Gemara itself says if the poor people renounce their rights, it's hefker, or it's not pay anymore. And since poor people can get welfare or various other programs from the government, in a sense, they've given up their rights. And so it's not hefker, rather it remains the owners. So pay is not going to help you here. So the only question is, do you have reshus? I would say yes, but I can't say for sure. I'd have to check it. I mean, I am not the one who gives reshus for this, but I don't imagine the yeshiva cares very much, unless there's a concern that you might damage the trees or might damage the landscape. But if you're careful not to do any damage to either the tree or the landscape, I can't imagine that the yeshiva is going to be makbid on it. Now, in terms of taking Terumah and Maaser, which is a major issue, right? It's a difficult shaila. Technically speaking, generally speaking, when you simply pick things off a tree with reshus, and you're eating it casually as a snack, and you haven't brought it into your house, into your room, it would be putter from Terumah and Maaser. On the other hand, the problem basically is that you're in an enclosed courtyard. And halachically, an enclosed courtyard would already have the halacha of a bias. And therefore, you're not even allowed to have snack eating. Meaning, if it would be mamish, let's say outside, lagamri, not in a chatzer, you would be allowed to eat it as a snack, as long as you don't make it a whole meal. But a chatzer is kaiveya l'maiser. The chatzer makes even a temporary eating as if it's a permanent eating. So l'maiser, you would have to take off trumas and maisers, even if you're only eating one or two fruits and the like. So that I think would be the basic rule there. Yeah.
So what exactly is the difference between Kol Min Shemayim and Avuha and Ruach Hakodesh?
Yeah, so the question is, what is the difference between, what is the first one you said?
Like a voice from heaven.
A voice from heaven, a Bas Kol, you mean? Let's say a Bas Kol, a Ruach Hakodesh, and Nevuah, right? These are three terms that we use to refer to getting messages from God. A Bas Kol, a voice from heaven, Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, and then we have Nevuah, which is prophecy. So let me change the order a little bit. These are, if you go from lower level to higher level, we start with Ruach HaKodesh, then we go up to Bas Kol, then we go up to Nevuah. So Nevuah is the absolute highest. So Ruach HaKodesh, you're not really hearing anything. You're not hearing anything from God. It simply means that you have various thoughts, and it comes because of your connection to Hashem, that Hashem inspired you in certain ways. Now, you don't always know that it's from Ruach HaKodesh, right? You don't always know. A person has thoughts. How do I know it's Ruach HaKodesh or not? But when people are, very righteous and high enough, they could have something called Ruach HaKodesh, which is, we might call divine inspiration. Now, interestingly enough, the Vilna Gaon actually says, every single Jew has Ruach HaKodesh. All of us have Ruach HaKodesh, meaning there is like a voice of God that is speaking from within us that can lead us to the right way. The only thing is, the Ruach HaKodesh gets obscured in the static of your taivas and your personal agendas, so you don't hear it because there's so much noise here. So if a person theoretically tries to purify themselves, they will be able to have a sense of Ruach HaKodesh. That's why there's an Eitzah in the name of Rav Chaim Volozhiner that if a person has a decision to make in life and they're not clear which way to go, they should learn for 2 hours straight without interruption. And then whatever their thought is at that moment is their Ruach Hakodesh speaking. So that's Ruach Hakodesh. So that's not directly hearing the voice of God, but God is inspiring you and leading you in a certain direction. Now, Bas Kol and Nevuah are indeed more difficult to differentiate, simply because both of them involve a hearing. You're hearing something from God, right? You're hearing Hashem say certain things. The Rambam tells us there are different levels of prophecy, and the Bas Kol is an inferior level, meaning it may come from a malach instead of from Hashem himself, etc. So it's still a divine voice, but it is not of the same madrega as Nevuah, and as a result, the spiritual perfection that you need in order to be able to tap into Nevuah, less is needed for a Bas Kol. But again, these are the types of things that, since none of us, well, I'll speak for myself, since I have not experienced the differentials in my own life, so it's hard for us to know the chilukim. It's hard for us to know the chilukim simply because we're not connected to either of those levels. But Ruach HaKodesh is something that does exist today. It absolutely does exist today. The Ravid writes at one point, when he argues with the Rambam, the Ravid actually says, Ruach HaKodesh Hafia bebeis midrashenu. Ruach HaKodesh came into our base midrash. Okay, that was the Ravid, but even much later, even Bisman Hazer, Rav Chaim Kinevsky, different Gedolim, it seems that they have some Ruach HaKodesh that we don't fully understand. And as I said, the Vilna Gaon says, everybody has Ruach HaKodesh. They just have to be able to know how to listen to it. Yeah.
What are we passing halacha between? I think it's maybe Mr. Zalman and Chafetz Chaim. Someone maybe said some lashon about somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the Chafetz Chaim and Rav Yisrael Salanter much earlier. Yeah. So this is a famous machlokes. Rav Yisrael Salanter was older than the Chafetz Chaim. So when the Chafetz Chaim published anonymously initially the Sefer Chafetz Chaim, based on the pasuk Mi Yoishe Chafetz Chaim, who is the man who wants the life, one who guards his tongue from speaking evil. So he was called the Chafetz Chaim because B'dafka Rav Yisrael Meir HaKohen published the Sefer anonymously. But Rav Yisrael Salanter was, so Chafetz Chaim was in his 30s. Rav Yisrael Salanter was in his 70s. It was near the end of his life. And Rav Yisrael Salanter was very, very happy with the Sefer Chafetz Chaim. It dealt with midos and yiras shamayim and perfecting something that many people were nichshal in, lashon hara. And he said, Baruch Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given a manhig to Klal Yisrael for the new generation. But the Welt says that he went through the whole Sefer very carefully, and there was one halacha in the Sefer Chafetz Chaim that Rav Yisrael Salanter was chaylik on, and that is, the Chafetz Chaim writes, if I speak lashon hara about you, that's an avera bein adam lechavero. I said something insulting about you, even if it's true, derogatory about you. So what is the general rule? If I sin bein adam lechavero, I can't just teshuva to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I got to go to you. I have to ask for your mechila, and you have the right to know what it is that I did. So says the Chafetz Chaim, I got to go tell you. I said this really bad thing about you. I said you were the stupidest person I ever met. Please be mochel me. So this is what the Chafetz Chaim says, that mechila for lashon hara is the same thing as mechila for any bein adam lechavera. So Rav Yisrael Salanter is said to have been cholik on that, because he said, well, what's going to be? If the guy knows that you said it, all right, so you ask mechila. The guy doesn't know. So what are you going to do? You're going to tell him, so you say, please forgive me for what I said about you. And you're going to say, well, what did you say? So what am I going to say? Well, you don't really want to know. You're mechayiv to tell him. So if Yisrael Salanter says, your bakashas mechila is going to make the guy feel a lot worse than he would have felt otherwise. So who are you to be a tzaddik on somebody else's cheshbon? So Yisrael Salanter said a very important yisod. If having to tell the person what you did is going to create a greater tsar to the person than not telling him, you are pater from bakashas mechila, and you ask Hashem to forgive you, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu basically considers you an onus on bakashas mechila. So this is a big machlokas. It's nogea l'maisa even today. So who do we paskin like? So obviously I cannot be machriya, but it is said b'shem Rav Aaron Kotler, who was after both of them, that he said in inyanim of Musar and Yiras Hashem, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is considered to be the posek ha'acharein, the final definitive posek, even keneged the Chafetz Chaim. So he said that the psak was, and I'm assuming that Rav Aaron himself probably got this from Slobodka, the Alter of Slobodka. He probably got it from the Musar Gedolim in Europe, that in such a situation you're not mavakish mechila. So that's how it's. Yeah.
Question Avuha, talks about like Elisha ben Avuha and like how he came to turn away from Hashem, what exactly the story was, and so it says there that he had some sort of vision, I guess, or some experience, some future character experience where he experienced God and like God, and he thought it was clear that he confused God for a double deity, and then so God said, because of that, I'm not going to allow you to meet them, or he interpreted it that way, and then later on also in Gemara it also spells out that like he had his Talmud, maybe it was Rameir, that was like pulling him to different base madrashes to like ask kids like psukim, and like that's like some sort of prophecy also, and all the stuff that they were telling him was basically like Hashem doesn't want your teshuva, and like you're never going to go to anything. So like what exactly was he supposed to do? Like what was like the right move for him to make? And like it seems like he's having all these prophecies like telling him like, yeah, you're just done.
Yeah. The question again, I'm always asked to repeat the question or at least summarize the question. Elisha ben Avuha was a Tanna. He was the Rebbi of Rebbi Meir, and he went off the derech in a very, very serious way. And as a result, we don't even always refer to him. Once in a while, we call him by name, but often he is just called Acher, the other one. We don't even mention his name. And how does such a great Talmud Chacham, he was a great Talmud Chacham, how does he go off the derech? The Gemara gives a whole, and we're in Chagiga, and the Medrash gives all sorts of reasons. He was osek in Greek philosophy. At the time of his bris, his parents were machlas him lebris for kavod. They thought they would get honor and glory. It was not lishma. Or there's a famous story that he saw a child climb up on a tree. His father told him, climb up the tree, chase away the mother bird, and take the eggs. So the kid is doing two mitzvahs, kibbud aviyim and shiluach haken, sending away the mother bird. And those are the only two mitzvahs where the Torah says explicitly, if you do those mitzvahs, you will get arichos yamim, you will get a long life. And the kid fell off the tree and he died. So Elisha ben Avuha said, how the Torah got to be false, because these are the two things the kid was doing for which Hashem promises arichos yamim. So it's a whole complicated thing. Why did he become a heretic? How did he become a heretic? But then you're going further with the story that at various times Hashem was almost sending him signs that Shuvu banim shovavim, all my wayward children should do teshuva, chutz me'acher, except for this guy who was Moreh, he rebelled against me. He knew me and he rebelled against me. Now, I do want to say a good word about Acher, because Acher, in a way, was much, much better than contemporary atheists. Acher did not want to cause other people to sin. And this is, to me, it's quite amazing. The Gemara recounts the story that Rabbi Meir continued to learn Torah from Acher, even after Acher became a heretic, even after he became an apikoros. The Gemara gives a story that Acher, kind of all of these averos at once, he's riding on a horse, that's Yom Kippur, which is Chal on Shabbos, and he's eating a treif sandwich on Yom Kippur, all of the averos are going on. And Rabbi Meir is running after him, asking him this shaila and this shaila and this shaila. And Elisha ben Avuha is giving him an answer while he's riding the horse and eating the treif sandwich. And finally, Rabbi Meir says, why don't you do teshuva? And that's when Elisha ben Avuha says, I heard the voice from Hashem, Bas Kol. He said Bas Kol, saying, Shuvu banim shovavim. All of you who are wayward, return to me. Chutz me'acher, I don't want him. He's no good. Now, the good thing about Acher, which I consider really remarkable, is at some point he told Rebbi Meir, you got to stop following me because you're going to violate your techum. On Yom Kippur's like Shabbos, you're only allowed to walk 2,000 amos from your place of residence once you're outside of a city. So Elisha ben Abuya said, Rebbi Meir, go back because this is going to be the end of your techum. And Rebbi Meir says, how do you know? He says, I counted the steps of the horse, the measurement and the like. Now, to me, this is remarkable. It's remarkable. Here you have Elisha ben Abuya, who is doing the worst averos, Yom Kippur and Treif and everything. And he's a kaifer b'yikr. I'll talk a little bit about what that meant exactly. And yet, he doesn't want Rebbi Meir to violate the laws of the Chum. Now compare that today. I don't even want to give you a website because I don't want you to look at it. But there are, atheists who are kind of into the kiruv world, right? Used to be kiruv was the attempt to bring people to Yiddishkeit. Now you have atheists. They're not happy to just be atheists. They want to be makarev you to atheism. They'll stop people in the street and engage in dialogue. How do you know there's a God? Well, what about this? Yeah, okay. I can chop the Christian. Okay, if you're a Christian missionary, okay, that's also bad. But at least the Christian missionary believes in a religion, so they also want to be makarev you. Although obviously that's not a good thing. But why does an atheist feel any compulsion to be makarev people to atheism? Like, what is that? So I have to say, they're much worse than Elisha ben Abuya, but Dafka didn't want to be Makalko Rebbi Meir. So I think he deserves a lot of credit, actually for that. But the issue is this. To call him like an atheist, to call him a kaifer, l'chayr is not right, because Elisha ben Abuya is talking about hearing Bas Kols. Elisha ben Abuya is talking about experiencing heavenly revelations. This is the famous Gemara about 4 great rabbis entered the celestial heavens, the Kisei HaKavod. 4 great rabbis. One of them became crazy. One of them died. Elisha ben Abuya became a heretic. And only Rabbi Akiva was nichnas b'shalom. He entered in peace, and he went out in peace. So imagine the madrega that Elisha ben Abuya had to be nichnas into that highest level. So he certainly believed in Hashem. He even believed in the Torah. But at some point, he was no longer able to live that way. He had too many questions, too many doubts, too many uncertainties. Things didn't make sense to him. But he understood that ultimately it was the right way. And that's why he didn't want to be Machshel Rebbi Meir. So the question is, was God really telling him, I don't want your tshuva? So some actually learn, and this may explain why Bas Kol is not as high as Nevuah, that it wasn't the genuine voice of God. It was his own cop-out. He said, this is what I understand. I think God rejected me. I think God doesn't want me. God hates me. And he became so despondent that he himself convinced himself that there's no derech of tshuva. And this, by the way, is something that you can encounter today. There are people, let's say, who were religious and they went off the derech, and they feel emotionally that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can no longer accept them, and why should they even try? It's very, very tragic. It's not good. Shuvu banim shayuvim chutz me'acher is acher convincing himself that that's the case, and lav dafka was that the reality. But some Hasidic Sfarim say, you know why he's called Acher? The Pashut Pshat is, he's the other one, we don't want to mention his name. Some say that the Apikaris was not his real persona, meaning his real self was good. Acher, this other evil personification, did not really represent his true essence. And at the end of the story, the end of the whole story is, Acher was nichnas to Olam Haba in the merit of Rebbi Meir. Rebbi Meir was mispalel and was mishtadel, and Acher ultimately was nichnas to Olam Haba. Very, very, very complex characters, a very complex story There are many, many layers to the story. There actually is a famous, maybe I shouldn't mention this, but it's a book many of you probably have already heard and maybe even read, as a driven leaf, written by a famous conservative rabbi, a traditional conservative rabbi, Milton Steinberg. And this is a fictionalized biography of Elisha ben Avuha, but it is based on midrashim and makoros. And it's an interesting book. Whether I would recommend it, I'm not sure. But again, it's not the worst thing you could read. Yeah.
I think follow up on one thing.
Yeah.
And some people like call him Acher as like kind of like in order not to say his name that like he's a bad person.
Yeah, that's the simple shot. Yeah.
So if he went to Gan Eden at the end of the story, like the end of the story is he went to Gan Eden, so then why do we care? Okay, so before all this stuff happened, the house killed.
That's an interesting question. Meaning, if at the end of the story he goes to Gan Eden, so it could be Taka, that maybe Bisman said we don't have to use the word Acher. Meaning, all the references to him as Acher occurred while he was basically still alive, and at that point he was Acher, right? So you have a good hara that today we don't have to refer to him by that appellation. That's a good shot.
If I'm understanding correctly, in certain places, certain Rishonim are mashma that only tzaddikim have haschaha pratis. The Rambam Moreh Nevuim, sometimes the Ramban and Iyov. If that's true, then if we're all supposed to look at ourselves as Benoni, how are we?
I'm sorry. If it's true, what's it?
If it's true that the Gemara says also that we're supposed to look at ourselves as Benoni, each individual is supposed to look at himself as a Benoni, then how are we supposed to have bitachon in Hashem that He wants us to do where we are? He wants us to put in a certain position. If we're not tzaddikim, we're supposed to look at ourselves as Beinonim. Yeah. This is a very, very difficult sugya. The sugya of haschaha pratis, divine providence, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is deciding every single thing that will happen in your life. Are you going to make the bus? Are you going to miss the bus? And big things, of course, a person gets sick or doesn't get sick. All of that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu determining specifically for you what is the right thing. This is called hashgacha pratis, as opposed to nature where things just happen. Everything is determined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, except, of course, for your decision to serve Hashem. Hakol b'dei shemayim, chutz mi'yirei shemayim. So there is a huge machlokas. I'm just repeating. The Rambam does have a shita that what we call unique hashgacha pratis is not something that is available for everybody. It is a madrega of tzaddikim. When people are tzaddikim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu directs every step in their lives. Now, that doesn't mean it'll always be good. There may be punishments, there may be other things, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making specific decisions. But for most people who are not on the madrega of tzaddikim, there is and for goyim and for animals, there is what is called haschaha klalis. Haschaha klalis means general providence rather than individualized providence. So Hashem will determine, the United States, we have to have 300 million people. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu then allows nature to take its course with earthquakes and illness and COVID, but he'll make sure the population never goes below 300 million, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a general plan for things, but what happens to individuals is lav dafka because of hashgacha. It might happen because of nature, wrong place or a wrong time, wrong place, right? This is the pashtus of the shita of the Rambam. Now we do know that the Mekubalim, and then later in the Derech Hashem of the Ramchal, and certainly among all the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, took a very, very different area, a different shita, and they take the position, which has actually become the mainstream thing that we teach in yeshivas, that everything is hashgacha pratis. The Eibishter makes decisions for every single individual, certainly every single Jew, that's for sure, and some will extend it even to non-Jews, and some will extend it even to animals and even plants.
whether a leaf gets ripped off, is determined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I would have to say the mainstream, I often say that everybody is a makubal today, even if you've never learned Kabbalah, everybody's a makubal because the mainstream theology of Judaism is primarily Kabbalistic. The Rambam said not. Now, the truth of the matter is, if you go with the Rambam, you do have a number of questions. Because according to the Rambam, it would appear that if a guy is walking in the street and he just gets hit by a car, not because he's negligent, he just gets hit by a car, that doesn't mean necessarily Hashem decreed he should be hit by a car. It just means Hashem was not mashgiach over him. So mikrei hateva, things happen. Either natural things happen or people are negligent. In other words, it's lav dafka, anything. Now, problem is, according to the Rambam, what is the purpose of davening? I mean, you daven when somebody's sick. You daven when somebody needs a shidduch. We daven when someone needs children or wants children. I mean, l'chayra, if Hashem is not intervening, if Hashem is not making the decisions, then what is tefillah about? So behechrich, we have to understand that even the Rambam is maida that at any given moment in time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can intervene. Meaning, the Rambam's rule that most people don't have haschaha pratis is what we might call the default setting of your life. The default setting is HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you're in a world, and in this world there's teva, and in this world there are volcanoes, and in this world there are tsunamis, and in this world there are terrorists. And most of the time you are at the mercy of all of these forces. But through tefillah and tshuva and staka, you can always ask Hashem to intervene. Meaning the tzaddik has this hashgacha all the time. The person that's not a tzaddik, the Rambam Shita is, it requires special divine intervention to be Yatzei Min HaKlal. In other words, that's for sure. Because if you're going to simply say there's no hashgacha pratis at all, unless you're in the Madrega of a tzaddik, then the whole idea of tefillah doesn't make sense, because tefillah is asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to intervene in a given situation. So now I think once you understand that qualification, I think that gives you a bit of a yishuv, because your question was, hashgacha pratis, like the Rambam, is only for tzaddikim. And for people who are not tzaddikim, everything is hashgacha klalis. Now the Gemara says we should regard ourselves as beinonim. Halvai, we should be beinonim. 50-50, half and half. So that would mean, if we look at ourselves as a beinoni, then we don't have hashgacha pratis. So again, what was your question again? And therefore,
how's a person like us as individuals supposed to have to govern that way?
Right. So again, so the short answer is that if you're a person who doesn't fall within the hashgacha pratis guarantee, you still have to have bitachon that through your tefillah and through your mitzvos, you will be zocha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will intervene in your particular situation. But it's episodic, so to speak, meaning to say the default setting is such and such, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu can kind of come in at different moments. But I do want to say that although you are actually correct that the Rambam's lashon in several places is that hashgacha pratis is only for tzaddikim. That certainly is a lashon, but many acharayim are so reluctant to explain the Rambam that way that they have different interpretations. Rabbi and Rebbi Gottlieb, the husband and wife team, they recently wrote a sefer. I'm not sure if it's published yet or not. They sent me a thing a draft about exploring this whole issue of hashgacha pratis. It's very kedai to look at because it is very, very complicated. I mean, there are a lot of things. If you don't go with hashgacha pratis, how do you even understand Rosh Hashanah? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, decides my fate. What is my fate? My fate is hashgacha pratis, right? So there's a lot of problems. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides your parnasa for the year. L'chayra, there are so many rayas that there is a hashgacha pratis for everybody that it's hard to really understand the Rambam Shita. But you are correct. The pashtus of the Rambam's lashon is what you say. Yeah. Daas Torah, yeah.
The basic understanding of having kids is that because someone who's got very elevated Das, and he's above Megios.
He's above what?
He's above Megios.
Yeah.
He gets removed
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
Bible.
yeah.
The problem with that is that surely a person's character reflects his Torah decisions. Meaning, I'll bring two rayas. Let's say you've got a family of Gedolei Torah who are all kanoim and it's in their blood, or you'll have, let's say, if someone's born into a Satmadaya, then even if you were to become a Gadol of Torah, you're still going to have the anti-Zionist shitta. So how do you explain the Daas Torah?
Yeah, this is the doctrine called Daas Torah, and again, just to actually how you define it is not so pashut, but the basic way it's used today is that a person who's totally devoted himself to learning Torah and to avodas Hashem has a special kesher with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as a result is able to perceive reality in a way that is deeper and more accurate than someone that's menutak. Again, let me just give you the two models. If you don't have a Daas Torah perspective on life, then you essentially view Yedias HaTorah as simply a specialty of life. I mean, the same way that you would go to an air conditioner guy to repair your air conditioner. All right, so I go to a Talmud Chacham to get a pshat and taisvis or to give a psak halacha. But when it comes to a general question of life, serve in the army or not serve in the army, or secular education versus not secular education. Well, who says he's better than me? Why is Rav Chaim Kanievsky's opinion better than me? A lot of these shilas are not the Farish Gemaras. They're not, textual things. They're not laws in the Shulchan Aruch. So the non-Daas Torah philosophy, which in many ways can be associated with modern orthodoxy, but I don't want to, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, the general inclination of modern orthodoxy is we respect Gedolim when it comes to halachic matters that are rooted in authoritative texts like the Gemara or the Shulchan Aruch, but when it comes to general questions of life for which there is no clear makor in Shas or the Shulchan Aruch, and it's just a matter of intuition or feeling. So the non-Daas Torah perspective is their feeling is no better than my feeling. And there is such a thing. In other words, I wouldn't ask an air conditioner technician who to vote for in the election, so why should I ask Rav Chaim Kanievsky to vote for an election? I mean, it's not his field. Daas Torah is premised on a very, very different type of premise. It's premised on the idea that when a person is makasher himself to the Torah Hashem, it's not just the particular knowledge that they have. It's not just, he knows every daf of Shas. He knows every siman in Shulchan Aruch. It's more than that. There's a greater hischabris to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is the makor of emes. And therefore, every single aspect of life is going to be illuminated by the Torah that a person learns. So even if a person learns Bava Metzia, he'll be able to, have eitzas in other areas. Right? So this is Daas Torah. So Daas Torah, therefore, has been invoked as being mechayev you to listen to Gedolim on matters of politics, matters of general hashkafa, even if there's no clear source, no clear makor in Shas and Paiskim. Okay? Alrighty. So the question becomes this. As you say, Daas Torah, in order for someone to be zeicha to this type of level, generally speaking, there's also a purification of midos. And one of the midos is that a person is only looking for emes, and a person doesn't have their own negios, their own agendas, or their own self-interest and the like. Because most people, most of the time, have biases that throw them off, and that throws off their judgment. So the question that was raised, I'm just repeating your question, is that l'chaira, that's almost impossible. Maybe it's impossible, because every person has the negios of how they were raised, the environment that they were in. So if you're a satmer, even if you become a gadol b'Torah, you will absorb the kanais of the community around you. If you're more of a Rav Kook type, let's say, tolerant, open, etc., so memela you'll absorb that. So if that's the case, how can somebody be negias free? I think the answer might be that maybe we have to redefine what we mean by negias, meaning the following. If a person absorbs certain shitos, certain approaches to life, I would say that's not a negias, that's a reflection of shivim panim l'Torah, that there are many, many different aspects, just like, and it comes from the shirish of your neshama, just like it says that Beis Hillel's neshama or Hillel's neshama was rooted in midas harachamim, and that's why he was Mako. Beis Shammai or Shammai's neshama was rooted in midas hadin, that's why he was machmer. So it's not that he consciously said, I'm going to be machmer, or I'm going to be Mako. They're looking for emes, but the Eibishter made neshamas with different shirashim, so they perceive emes in different ways. So the Satmar Kanais, or the Rav Kook, I'm just using him as opposites, expansiveness, does not come from agendas. It comes from the fact that the Eibishter gave different shirashim. There are different roots for the neshama. Hashem is infinite. Within HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mitzias, all of these perspectives exist, and different neshamas take different things. So I would think that's a strength, which means, by definition, there can be a machlokas of Daas Torah, meaning I could subscribe to Daas Torah, but some gedolim will view something this way, some will view it this way. Who do I follow? Okay, so that's a difficult question, but I follow my Messiah, I follow the gedolim that I'm close to, whatever it would be. But I wouldn't automatically translate that as negias. I would simply say that people's netias of perceiving emes is based on the shirish of their neshama, and that is legitimate. The Eibishter wants emes to come through the prism of those different approaches in life.
No, I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask, so if let's say I was going to Oral Torah, who's let's say more complex, or it's asking him an opinion about that subject. Let's say if I go to a Satmar Oral Torah, it's not going to be his Daas Torah. It's going to be the shitta, let's say, of a few generations up.
Well, I think that's true because once again, part of the shikul in Daas Torah is to be connected to a Masorah, meaning Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't expect every gadol to rethink an issue, to reinvent the wheel, and to rethink an issue like he's the first person who was ever asked. Part of it is Masorah, but Daas Torah can also tell a gadol when he should depart from the Masorah. In other words, that's also part of the shikul, meaning most of the time we will follow a Masorah. Sometimes it's Eis Laslish Lashem, Heferet Torah. So so it's a complicated process. HaKadosh Baruch Hu recognizes that on many, many questions there are different shitas. There is a legitimacy of machlekes, and each is reflecting an aspect of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and both of them are Daas Torah. See, this is interesting. With Yaakov Kamenetsky, the Aguda has Agudas Yisrael, both in Eretz Yisrael and in America, has a different leadership council, but it's called Moyetzes Gedolei Torah, the Council of Torah Sages. Right, those are the Gedolim who lead Agudas Yisrael. Okay, it's a whole controversy who gets on the Moetzes, who doesn't. All right, sometimes there are different issues there, but these are b'derech klal, these are recognized Gedolei Yisrael, and they try to speak with a unified voice, meaning they'll issue hachrazos and they'll have everybody sign. But sometimes not everybody agrees. There are machlekes in the Moetzes itself. Just one example. I don't want to get in trouble, but just last year, when there was this voting for the Zionist elections and the like, so the Moetzes' main view was it was usher, but there were some gedolim who didn't sign on that hachraza because they held it was mutter, whatever. They didn't want to say barabim, but etc. And of course, Ohr Somayach itself, we had gedolim that said it was proper for us to encourage voting, which is why we did it. So there were mamish chilukei deis. But in one early case, a different situation, there was a certain gadol who was taking a controversial position, and the other members of the Moetzes went to Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was chaylik on him legamri, and they said, you have to issue a statement against this position. And Rav Yaakov said, why? He's a person who knows Shas, he's a person who knows Shulchan Aruch, he's a gadol. The fact that he takes a position keneged me Doesn't mean I should denounce it. It doesn't mean I should be mavatal it. He is entitled to his deya. He's a baldeya. And I think that should be our attitude. And unfortunately, sometimes it turns out that not so much the Gedalim, Baruch Hashem, but sometimes the followers of Gedalim will look at a different shita and they will say, oh, the person's apikoris, the person's a kofer, the person's an amaoretz, the person's erev rav, whatever it will be, without recognizing that it's elu v'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Each shita has a makam in Klal Yisrael. We shouldn't be involved in disparaging these shitas. Yeah.
How do you recognize when a view is just different than your own and we're all on the same side versus when something is just far enough out that it leaves being part of Klal Yisrael as a whole?
Yeah. This is again a very, very hard question, very good question. That is, okay. So I have a shita and someone has a different shita. So b'derech klal, I say, okay, he's entitled to his shita. I don't have to denounce him, even if it's not the shita that I follow in my own life. Now the question is, okay, that's a good rule generally, but isn't there such a thing? And there certainly is such a thing as apikorsis, as kafira, as heresy, as something that's going so far out that it's no longer a legitimate expression of Torah. Something can be legitimate even if I disagree with it, but at some point it's going to cross a red line into kfira apikorsis, and I can't. Now again, whether I should actively denounce it, that's a question of tactics. I don't think that's even your question, but the question is, like, when in my own mind do I label something as so far gone that it is not a legitimate expression of Torah? It's not a pashut question, and unfortunately, in modern society, this is being challenged all the time. This is being challenged. People say divrei Torah. People write pshatim on the Akedah. For example, now there's a popular thing going around that Avram Avinu failed the Akedah. Yeah, this is a mahalach that for some reason a lot of people find attractive. It avoids, how could a man, kill his son, be willing to go son, etc. Now, some would say that that's kfira mamish. The Torah itself says the Akedah was the highest level of Avram Avinu's Amunah, and now you're telling me not. He failed it. Okay. So I would say that the general litmus test is the understanding consistent with the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amunah? If it's consistent with the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amunah, then even if it's a very, very different pshat, but it's within the wide net of Elu Divrei Elokim Chayim. Once it violates the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amunah, so at that point it would become kafira, would become apikorsis. But even that answer is not as easy as it may sound, because there are machloks on how to interpret the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amunah. So somebody who may violate the way I understand the Yud Gimel Ikrei may think he's not violating it the way he understands the Yud Gimel Ikrei, right? So it's going to be a difficult question, and you're going to find this over and over and over again, because with the internet age, so many people are writing and teaching and making videos, and Baruch Hashem, a lot of it is very, very good, but a lot of it can really cross that line. So you just have to be vigilant and remember the Ikrei Amunah as you understand them, because you can only make judgments based on your understanding. I mean, every person has to try to understand and then apply those Ikrim to the situations. Yeah.
I saw quoted that Rabbi Yochanan said he attributed all his greatness in Torah to once seeing Rebbi's fingers slip out his glove. What exactly did Rabbi Yochanan mean by that statement? What were you trying to say?
Yeah, the Gemara has a few statements about people who became great in Torah because they saw the back of the head of Rav or Rebbi or whatever it would be, and if they would have seen the front, they even would have been greater. And then Rish Lakish said, and Rav Yochanan talked about. I don't think necessarily you have to understand those passages in the most literal sense. I think what they're saying is that there's something you absorb beyond information. What you absorb from a Rebbe, from a Gadol, let's say, is not simply the specific Torah that they teach you, but just from their mannerisms, just from seeing their face, just from hearing their voice, there's a certain holiness that you can absorb and that you can catch, and that can influence you in all sorts of ways. That is why David HaMelech says, "V'hayu einecha ro'os es marecha," your eyes should see your teacher. There actually is a preference to see a Rebbe when a Rebbe is teaching you Torah, because there is an influence that can come. I remember when I was young, I've said some stories about this before. Rav Moshe Feinstein used to visit our community in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut. He would sometimes spend 2 weeks. He had a relative. Our joke was, I remember this as a kid, that Rav Moshe wanted to go to the one place on earth where nobody would ask him any halachic shaylas. Okay, whatever. So he would go to Hartford, Connecticut, and I was in fourth grade. One year that he was there, and I was still going to school. We were not out on summer vacation yet when Rav Moshe came, and I would be in the car. I would daven shachris and then go to school, and I was zocher to be in the car with Rav Moshe Feinstein. I don't think I spoke to him. I think I gave him good Shabbos or something, but I didn't speak to him. But I watched him. I was staring at him all the time. And the one thing I remember, I absolutely remember this as a fourth grader, that there was a shining glow on his face, like the light of the Shekhinah. It was undeniable. I knew it. I saw it as a fourth grader, and there was no question that just gazing at that face is something that you can absorb, really, really significant. So I think what Chazal are being merames is that don't think the only thing you get from your Rebbe is information. You get, the Torah is communicated in many ways, by gesture, by face, by, just position of the hands or whatever it would be. All of these things kind of combine and give you something. And that's why Chazal say, Gadol shimusha yasher milimuda. This is a famous statement. To be mashamesh, to serve a Talmud Chacham, can even be greater than learning. Serving a Talmud Chacham would be you have the zchus to make him a cup of tea, or whatever it is, because you kind of see him in all of these different avenues, and that creates a certain hashpah. It's a little chaval that we don't necessarily have. The way modern life is set up, we don't necessarily have that type of closeness in that way. But it used to be that Rebbes kind of like lived, with the Talmidim, and they were like a big family, and they saw the Rebbe in all different things. I mean, the Gemara gives us an example of this, which is frankly an outrageous example that even Rav got a little upset. It's not so tznuah, but it's in the Gemara, so I'll mention it. It says Rav Kahana wanted to understand the proper way of having relations with one's wife. So the Gemara says that Rav Kahana hid under Rav's bed. He wanted to see everything. So at some point, Rav caught on. Rav said, Kahana, some things, you gotta, you're not allowed to do. But ad kedei kach, you understand Rav Kahana's perspective. Rav Kahana's perspective was, I want to know everything about my Rebbe, not just the learning. And this was an extreme example of that. Yeah.
So you see, like, instance where Eliyahu sets up the altar at Carmel to disprove the idolaters, and normally you're not allowed to set up an altar. However, the prophets in certain times, they know through prophecy or whatever that, okay, we're allowed to break this rule this one time. So the question is, how did the Tanaim know that it was okay to write down the Mishnah when you're normally not allowed to write down the oral law through prophecy?
Yep, excellent question. Again, just to be sure everyone knows the reference here. In the book of Malachim, when most of the Jewish people were worshiping the Canaanite idol called Baal, so Eliyahu Hanavi wanted to be Makadesh Shem Shemayim, so he proposed a contest. He says, let's build 2 altars by Mount Carmel, Haifa, there, and one altar will be for the prophets of the Baal, and one will be Hashem. And Eliyahu Hanavi then called on Hashem to bring a fire down from heaven, and the prophets of the Baal were dancing around, calling on the Baal. And of course, what happened was that a fire came down from heaven. It consumed Eliyahu Hanavi's korban, and everybody temporarily, it only lasted a day, temporarily everybody did teshuva, and they bowed down and they said, as we say after Yom Kippur, Hashem Hu Elokim. Wonderful, wonderful tshuva. It's been pointed out, the Rambam points out, that Lamaisa, what Eliyahu Hanavi did was an Isser D'Oraisa, because there was a Beit Hamikdash in Yerushalayim at the time, and when there's a Beit Hamikdash, there's an Isser D'Oraisa to bring korbanos outside of the Beit Hamikdash. How could Eliyahu Hanavi build a Mizbeach and bring a korban to Hashem in Hara Carmel? And the answer is that a Navi is permitted to temporarily, if a Navi were to tell you there's no longer an Isser to bring a korban outside of the Beit HaMikdash, he would be a Navi Sheker, because he's contradicting the Torah. But if it's a one-time or temporary for Kiddush Shem Shemaim, he could do it. Now, you are right. You did add, I think, an important qualification. Sometimes when you hear this, you think that the Navi has the power. I think you are correct. It's not that the Navi has the power. Rather, the Navi communicates through prophecy that Hashem said to do it. Meaning, the Navi cannot make the decision on his own. Rather, the Navi communicates, this is what God told me. Now, and the difference is, if he would tell me that God told me permanently it's mutter, we would call him a Navi Sheker. If, on the other hand, he is communicating that God said to do it one time, we are makabel the nevuah and we do it. So what you're saying is an important point that some people might not always get, and that is the din of hayrashah, temporary emergency suspension of the Torah, is a chelik of nevuah. It is not a power of the Navi as a person. It is a nevuah that we will be makabel. Now, based on that, you ask a very good question, because we find Chazal in the time of the Mishnah and later in the time of the Gemara, where there were no Nevi'im, right? Chazal themselves abrogated a law of the Torah in order to ensure the survival of the transmission of the Torah, right? The oral law is not supposed to be written down. And yet, in the time of Rebbi, Rav Yehuda Nasi, it was decided initially that because in the aftermath of the Churban and the Bar Kokhba revolt, etc., Torah knowledge was very diminished, and if we didn't write things down, there was a real danger people would forget. So they applied the pasuk, Eis Laseis Lashem. When it's time to stand up for God, hey, Pharaoh Torah Sacha, we annul the Torah. This is called Bitula Zui Kiyuma, that sometimes you have to be Mavatal the Torah in order to ensure its survival. Now, this is an extraordinary power, and obviously in the wrong hands, it could be abused, right? You could invoke this for everything. You could say, oh, we have to allow people to drive to shul on Shabbos because otherwise they're not going to... I mean, this is exactly what the conservative reform movement did. We have to allow that, otherwise people aren't going to go to shul, etc. So obviously, this can only be done by the greatest of the Chachamim. But the question is a very good question. Who told them that this was the Ratzon Hashem? Meaning to say, Bishlama Eliyahu Barak Carmel, this was part of his nevuah. But Chazal didn't have a nevuah, right? So Chazal made a judgment. So what gives them the authority to make that judgment? It is a good kasha, but the answer is that this is nichlal, that their responsibility to ensure the survivability of Torah in Am Yisrael, which is what Chazal's job is, gives them the extraordinary power to make these judgments. I mean, let me give you an example. This is an extreme case, but we have lesser cases. For example, not blowing shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. They make a gezerah lest you carry the shofar. Now you realize Chazal are taking away a mitzvah saseh min haTorah. And don't give me an answer, well, listen, you're going to blow shofar the second day of Rosh Hashanah, so you're not losing the mitzvah. Well, you are losing the mitzvah, because blowing the shofar the second day of Rosh Hashanah is technically midrabanan. So you are losing a mitzvah d'oraisa. Same thing when the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos and the like. And we say, what? The Chachamim have a koach to be oker a mitzvah, at least if it's passive. Of course, in the case of writing the Torah Sheba'al Peh, it's an active violation. Okay. So your point that it is very different than Eliyahu Bar Carmel is a very good point, but L'maisa we have to say that this is nichlal. When you're given the achrayas to preserve the Torah in Am Yisrael, there are going to be extraordinary emergency powers that are going to go along with that. And they did base it on a pasuk, Eis Lasais Lashem, Heferu Torah Secha. Yeah.
Why is it like the norm in many yeshivas not to discuss like the Kuzari and different proofs? But if that's
Yeah.
then how does that make us different than the other religions?
How is it what? How is it what?
How does it make us different than any other religion? Just to blindly follow.
Yeah, so part of the issue, so the question just was bekitzer is that in the standard yeshiva curriculum, works of Jewish philosophy are widely ignored. So, for example, if I were to ask one of you, please get me a copy of the Moreh Nevuim from the bookshelf over there. So you would run over, and eventually you would say, there is no Moreh Nevuim on the bookshelf over there, huh? Well, don't we have all the Rambams there? Well, we don't have all the Rambams there. We have the Mishnah Torah there and the Sefer HaMitzvahs. We don't have Moreh Nevuim. Now, the yeshiva does have a Moreh Nevuim. I could direct you to some side room where it's there. It's there somewhere, but it's not in the regular base medrash, right? It's not. Somebody actually was a visitor to Ohr Somayach, was in the base medrash downstairs, and he was like looking at the Rambams and the Rambam. He finally asked me, "So where do they keep the Moreh Nevuim?" I said, "Not in this room." Okay, and the Kuzari is another. Although the Kuzari is a very, very different sefer for sure, but the Kuzari is kind of the same fate. Now we do learn Sifrei Musar. But Musar is not exactly the same. It's not really going over the philosophical ideas here. So why is that so? I mean, obviously, these are Sifrei Kodesh. And why would they not be so much part of our curriculum? So in the Litvische yeshivas, these Sfarim were not studied that much, simply because there was actually a belief, and maybe it was connected to the haschaha, that when you open up philosophical questions, you're opening up a Pandora's box, and you never know where this will lead to. Let's say we would want to give a shiur on, let's prove the existence of Hashem. Let's prove that there's a God. Well, that sounds great. In fact, according to the Rambam, the mitzvah of emunah is not just blind faith, but to intellectually understand why Hashem has to exist. So that's great. But what happens if we open this question and this question and this question, and what if you're not so convinced by the answers? But until we ask the questions, it didn't bother you. There's a danger. Now, this danger, by the way, was identified all the way back in the Rambam's own time. That's why the Moreh itself was subject to a lot of controversy, precisely because they felt that the Rambam was opening up questions which could lead to kfira. This is why the Chayvas Halavavas, which is normally regarded as a Musar sefer, but the first shar, the first gate in Chayvas Halavavas is called Shar HaYichud, which is a philosophical discussion of proofs for the existence and the unity of God. And a typical statement about Shar HaYichud is the statement of the Gra that says, Chayvas Halavavas is Kadosh v'Torah Tahar. You should start from chapter 2, start from Shar HaBechina, meaning skip Shar HaYichud. And this is common. And in fact, there are hakdamas to Chayvas Halavavas that will have 50 pages of references about not looking at Shar HaYichud and the like. So I think the main fear was that sometimes questions can create complexities. Now, Lamaisa, in yeshivas that cater to Chosrei B'tshuva, like Ohr Somayach and others, these Svarim are much more studied, simply because, many of our Talmidim have already been exposed to apicorsis. So as a result, nothing worse is going to happen by learning these Svarim. So we should learn these Svarim. If you want to share in Moreh Nevuim, I think Rabbi Gottlieb has been giving one for a long time. So you can come to Ohr Somayach. That's why I noticed over the years, maybe less so now, I don't know if Mir changed its rules, that a lot of the philosophy shiurim, we'd have people from Mir and other yeshivas come to Ohr Somayach b'dafka because they could get treatment of subjects that would otherwise not be treated. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but I think Lamaisa there was this fear that we don't want to open up people to become kafrim. Yeah.
I hold that Mashiach comes, Mechoim, Kehanim. Is that true? If that's true, what is associated?
I'm sorry, say again. When Mashiach comes, who?
Mechoim.
Oh, Bechor. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a very good question. Let me give a little background on it. We know, of course, that originally the Avodah of Karbanos and the like was given to the Bechor of every family. In fact, that's the whole story in this week's Parsha of Yaakov buying the Bechorah from Esav. That's the Zechus of Avodah. And that's why every Bechor is still Kadesh today and has to be redeemed with the Pidyon Haben. But as a result of the Chet HaEgel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took away the Avodah from the Bechor and instead was given to Kohanim and Leviim. Right? That's the system that we have. So Chazal do not say the Avodah will go back to Bechor. It is actually a very late source. The Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, there's a Chiddush. The Ohr HaChaim says that Liyosid Lavai B'Mos HaMashiach, the Chet HaEgel will be atoned. There'll be a complete kapara. And if there'll be a complete kapara, the Avodah will go to the Bechor, go back to the Bechor, and the Bechor will become the role of a Kohen Levi will go back to the Bechor. Now the emes is, in the Rambam himself, it's mashma kemat exactly the opposite. The Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim that when Mashiach comes, the Karbanos will go back, the Kohanim will officiate. And what do we say in our davening too? What do we say in Musaf? For Hashev, Kohanim, Liavodosam, Uleviim, Lishiram, Ulizimram, right? In other words, the Kohanim will do their Avodah, right? So number one, the Rambam says Kohanim will go back to their Avodah. Number two, the davening says Kohanim will go back to the Avodah. And number three, which is your question, isn't it one of the Ikrei Emunah anyway, fundamental principles of faith, that the laws of the Torah are not going to be changed? So if the Eibishter created a situation where Kohanim do the Avodah, that's in the Torah, that's not going to be changed. So theologically, what the Ohr HaChaim says is Keneged, the Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah. So because of this, there are actually many Makoros that do not agree with the Ohr HaChaim in this Nekuda. But in defense of the Ohr HaChaim, some say, I'll give you two pshatim they say in the Ohr HaChaim. Number one, when the Ohr HaChaim says the Avodah will go to Bechor, it doesn't mean the Kohen will be excluded. It just means Kohanim and Bechor. Now that doesn't fully answer the question of changing the mitzvah, but it does not displace the Kohen. It simply augments the Kohen with the Bechor. That's one explanation. Another explanation is that when it says the Bechor will get the Avodah again, it only refers to the narrow, specific group of Bechorim that did the Avodah. Meaning it doesn't mean if you're a Bechor, you'll do the Avodah. It means those people who were bumped, meaning at the time of the Egel, there were people Bechor who did the Avodah, whatever number they were, by Techiyas HaMesim, they'll get their old job back. So it doesn't have any implication beyond that specific number of Bechor at the time of the Chet HaEgel. But you are right, it is a very, very big Chiddush, and it seems to go against the idea that in the Messianic age, the mitzvahs are not going to change. This is one of the Rambam's Ikrei Emunah, that the Torah is not going to be muchlefas. The reason why the Rambam considered this such an important ikr is this was essentially our answer to Christianity and Islam. Because remember, Christianity and Islam are modeh to Matan Torah. They say God gave the Torah to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. They're modeh to it. They're modeh to it. But what do they say? God changed his mind. God, as it were, gave a different revelation to Yashka, so says the Christians, or to Muhammad. So it's very fundamental in Jewish understanding that the Torah is unchangeable, because once you admit the Torah is changeable, you are conceding a tremendous amount of ground to Christian claims and Muslim claims. So you're right. When you're changing a mitzvah by elevating the Bechor, you do have this problem. But remember, it's not Chazal, it is the Orach Chaim. Now, from the Arizal, there's something else that makes it complicated. But you'll have the same number of questions. He says, Kohanim and Leviim are going to switch roles. He's going to say that the Levi will become the Kohen, and the Kohen will become the Levi. What's that based on? It's based on the idea that Kohanim represent Midas Harachamim, and Leviim represent Midas Hadin, and therefore, since in this world, Rachamim is the main thing, because we're not able to live with Din, so Kohanim are the Balei Avodah. But Liyasid Lavai, God will go back to his original plan, which is Midas Hadin, and therefore the Levi will be elevated to the Kohen. And the Arizal also says, this is very famous, that's why Liyasid Lavai, the halacha is going to be like Beis Shammai over Beis Hillel, because in this world, where we have to go with Midas Harachamim, so we go like Beis Hillel, who's usually Mekel, Midas Harachamim. But the Moshe Mashiach, the world will be on a higher level of perfection. So we can even have Midas Hadin. So Liyasid Lavai, it's again the famous thought of the Arizal, Liyasid Lavai, the halacha is going to be like Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai is the standard of Mashiach, is the standard of higher perfection. Midas Hadin. Yeah.
A Jewish reporter recently brought up a question to the Trump administration about rebuilding the Beit Hamikdash.
Yeah.
The question is that actually like how? Is there a possibility that's how it's going to work?
Yeah. I think the press secretary said, "Well, we have no plans right now." Although you don't know, Trump is building this huge banquet hall or whatever it is in the White House. He's doubling the size of the White House, so might as well go to the Beit Hamikdash, So here's the thing. L'maisa, if we just looked at Tanakh, let's look at Nach for a second. There is a lot of precedent for non-Jews rebuilding the temple. I mean, the second temple initially was financed, at least, by Cyrus, the Persian king, who financed the money that was needed for the construction. And it was later enhanced by Herod, Hordes. Herod was not Jewish, right? So the notion that a non-Jewish monarch of the Jewish people would be mishtatef in Binyan Beis Hamikdash is not impossible. The Bayis Sheni was essentially that way. However, we do have a tradition that the Bayis Shalishi, which is the permanent Beis Hamikdash, is going to be very different than the Bayis Sheni. According to Rashi in Masechet Shavuos, the Bayis Shalishi is going to be Yored Min HaShamayim. It's not going to be constructed by human beings at all. It will literally come down from the heavens. And according to the Rambam does not bring that, but the Rambam says it will be built by Mashiach. That one of the roles of Mashiach is to be Baina the Beis Hamikdash. So based on either Rashi or the Rambam, it would appear that Trump will not be building the third Beis Hamikdash. Some people say Trump is Mashiach, but I assure you, although I do like Trump, but I assure you he's not, for sure he's not Mashiach. So it would appear that wouldn't be the case. Yeah.
Situation I find myself in somewhat frequently, and I'm sure for other Bachrim too, is you go to like a different shul or someone's house, and you end up, I'm Sephardi, so I'll go based on that, but applies to others too. And you end up in a situation where there's no Sephardi Sidurim or benchers.
Yeah.
And then I've always been unsure what to do, go based on memory, but then you could slip up and forget something in the middle. What would be the best thing for one to do in that situation?
Yeah. So just to be sure people have the baseline halacha, if you're in a shul that's davening a different nusach, Ashkenaz, Sephardi, or vice versa, so the general rule is all of the stuff that you say silently, you should do with the nusach that you normally daven in. So if you're Sephardi in an Ashkenazi shul, you daven your Sephardi Shmona Esrei. However, all of the things that require a minyan and you're responding publicly, you should do the nusach of the shul. So the silent Shmona Esrei, again, going with the example of a Sephardi in an Ashkenazi minyan or vice versa. So the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi minyan should daven a Sephardi Shmona Esrei, but should answer an Ashkenazi Kedusha, And, although this is widely not followed, if you're saying Kaddish, you say the Ashkenazi Kaddish. I know Sephardim always say their Kaddish no matter where they are, but for myself, they should say the Ashkenazi Kaddish and vice versa. This is at least the psak of Rav Moshe Feinstein, who of course was an Ashkenazi posek, so you get into circular issues there. Now, the only exception is, interestingly enough, if you're the chazan. This is very interesting. If you're a Sephardi chazan in an Ashkenazi minyan, you should even daven the silent Amida, Ashkenazi. And the reason is very logical. The Gemara explains that why does the chazan have to daven the silent Amida? He's going to do Chazaras Hashatz. The answer is the silent Amida for the chazan is to prepare himself to be able to do Chazaras Hashatz properly. So if it's a preparation for the Chazaras Hashatz, then you as chazan should say the silent Amida the way you're going to say it in Chazaras Hashatz. Okay, now this is assuming you have your Sephardi Siddur and you can do your Nusach. Now your question was, but what if I show up? Again, a Sephardi showing up in Ashkenazi minyan, there are no Sephardi, there's no Edot HaMizrach Siddurim, so what should I do? So the short answer is you do it Ashkenazi. In fact, I would recommend, unless you're very, very ragil in doing it by heart, I would recommend that don't try that unless you really, really know it well, because you might get verbludgeoned, you might get confused. So in such a situation, you daven Ashkenazi, and there's no question, there is absolutely no question that an Ashkenazi is Yotzei with Nusach Sfarad, and a Sephardi is Yotzei with Nusach Ashkenaz. None of the chilukim are going to be ma'akev in whether you're Yotzei b'tefillah. So you do the best that you can. Yeah.
Does that include saying Brichu during Kaddish?
Yeah, even that. So Baruch Hashem, these differences are not fatal. Meaning, whatever you do, you are going to be Yotzei. Yeah, the Chatchila, we have different laws about which nusach you should say, but 100%. And by the way, the same thing is true for mezuzahs. People ask me, I've gotten this question a lot for some reason, because a lot of the diros, a person rents an apartment, so a lot of the landlords are Sephardi. Now you know that for Sifrei Torah, Tefillin, and mezuzahs, the kasav of Sephardim is a little different than the Ashkenazi kasav. It's interesting. The Ashkenazi ksav is called ksav Beis Yosef. Interesting. It's change of term here. So people ask me if I'm an Ashkenazi and my landlord put up all Sephardi mezuzahs, am I obligated to change them? So the truth is, l'chatchila, if it's not a big financial burden, you taka should. But b'diavad, it's kosher. B'diavad, the Sephardi mezuzahs are kosher for Ashkenazi and vice versa. And even the way the mezuzah is put, right? The Ashkenazi minhag is we put the mezuzah on a slant. Many Sephardim have the minhag that the mezuzah is a straight, vertical line. So if you're in your dira, the mezuzahs are straight up. You're not mechuyev to change them, although actually that's probably easier to do than get new mezuzahs just to reorient them and the like. So Baruch Hashem, most of the time, these differences are not fatal, and you will be yotzei either way. Yeah.
There's certain communities that follow a single post, I guess, like the last post, like everything they do is based on that, like the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, the Gra.
Yeah.
In today's generation, is a person allowed to keep following like the Gra or something like that? Because in a lot of cases you see that this Safek Brachot Le'akel, that even like the Gra would say before each of the daven, you should wash your hands and say the Brach of Al Nehila Yadayim. And we know today we don't do that. So
Yeah.
the proper way to follow Halacha.
Yep. So this is interesting. On one hand, we have in Halacha, which you might call mainstream rulings, the Mishnah Berurah, whatever it would be, and that's sometimes not like the Gra. The Gra was very interesting. The Gra obviously was an unparalleled gadol, but the Gra was not the Rav of Vilna. The Gra was not. In fact, the Gra had no position at all in Vilna, and it is said the minhagim in Vilna were not the minhagim of the Gra. The Gra had to get permission from the Kehila to make his own little minyan called the klalis, where in his minyan they did stuff. And it's recorded, by the way, even in his minyan, there were only things that he did and the rest of the minyan didn't do either. So I'm saying, so number one, his minhagim were not the minhagim of Vilna. They were only the minhagim of the klalis, as it was called. And number two, in the klalis itself, there were minhagim that he had that were not for the rest of the people. So one of the questions that one could ask is, in fact, there was a Talmud in Ohr Somayach who asked, who he's not here now, but he's not here anymore. But he asked me. He says he considers spiritually the Vilna Gaon to be his Rebbe, and if he considers Vilna Gaon to be his Rebbe, is he allowed to simply follow all the minhagim of the Gra, even if it means saying brachos, where you normally wouldn't say a bracha? Tibula b'mashka, the Vilna Gaon holds, when you dip vegetable in liquid, and you're eating it with your hands, you make an al natilas yadayim. Not right. Could he do this? So the truth of the matter is, the answer is yes, but it has to be an all or nothing basis. Meaning, if a person wants to be makabel, that I regard myself as a Talmud of the Gra, they are permitted to make such a Kabbalah, but it can't be a pick or choose thing. It has to be an all or nothing. Now, the same thing is even true with the Rambam. They say, which is quite unusual, Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer. Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer was a great gadol. And it's funny, we don't hear about him so much today. He was Aaron Kotler's father-in-law, but he was a great gadol in his own right. And by the way, he was also Meshunidik, not only for his phenomenal Yediyas HaTorah, but his Midos Tovos. In fact, they said when he was Nifter, that even if he would have been an Amma Aretz Gomer, he would have been the greatest Yid in Yerushalayim because of his Midos alone. So he was a Meshunidik, a great person. And Rav Yisrael Zalman's main sefer is a big sefer on the Rambam, Even Hoazel. It's a big parish on the Rambam. He was a Talmud of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. And it is said that Rav Yisrael Zalman paskined like the Rambam. He said he spent so many years with the Rambam that, now this is very unusual. I mean, Teimanim, many Yemenite communities go like the Rambam. That's fine. But Rav Yisrael Zalman was a Lithuanian. Rav Yisrael Zalman was a Litvisher. We don't paskin like, Litvisher don't paskin like the Rambam. Litvisher paskins like the Ramah. I mean, Rav Yosef Karo, most of the time paskins like the Rambam, but the Ramah doesn't. So he was mamish departing. He was departing from his father's minhagim. He was departing from his Rebbe's minhagim. But he held that his shaykhus to the Rambam created a Rebbe-Talmud relationship, even though the Rambam was dead, 800 years before him. And he held that that was something that allowed him to follow the Rambam's shita. So there is such a thing. But you need to talk to a Rebbe who knows you about it, because sometimes it may not be the right thing to do if it's going to alienate you from the tzibur, from the kahal. It may not be the best thing to do, because al tifresh minat tzibur. But miyikar adin, you are allowed to take someone like the Gra, someone like the Rambam, and go with it. Yeah.
How would this work out with like picking this heter from Ramesha and this from him? Are you allowed to pick and choose, or if you're gonna go like Ramesha, then you have to hold like all?
No. So I think that's very different, because the emes is, when you have a machlokes, let's say, whether something is usher on Shabbos and mutter on Shabbos, and then you have another machlokes, is blended whiskey, Scotch, mutter or usher, the psukim have nothing to do with each other. They're totally unrelated. So theoretically, it's shaykh. The Gemara itself says that you can go like different mandi amrim if the questions are not necessarily connected. So, although I would say the following, you shouldn't do it just because you want to be mekel, because that's a lack of yiras shamayim. And you shouldn't even do it because you want to be machmer, because that may be the laziness of not being baidek. But if you went into the sugya and you think Rav Moshe is more mistavra here and Rav Shlomo Zalman is more mistavra here, you do have permission to pick and choose. The reason why I said a moment ago that you shouldn't pick and choose the Gra, because that's talking about where the halacha pesuka is not like the Gra. So then, if you want to do something that's keneged a halacha pesuka, you got to totally adopt the Gra as your Rebbe. But if it's a machlekes, Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv or something, where there's no halacha pesuka, it's just a general machlokes haposkim, then you are allowed to pick and choose, but you should do so after learning the sugya. So it's a different type of question than he was raising. Yeah.
We see like in Chazal that on the one hand, like tefillah is incredibly important, and it's like the highest of the highest. But on the other hand, you find and like people are mizalz on it. On the other hand, you find that like the Gemara will say like one of the biggest things that could like, I guess, like Torah person is davens expecting it to be answered, sort of. It's like sort of like the kahuna.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Say again.
Like we see how high Chazal regard tefillah.
Oh, tefillah. Yeah. Yeah.
On the other hand, we see that if a person davens with thinking that it'll get answered, or even like with that potential, then he could end up like getting further from Hashem.
Yeah. It's a good question. Just to be sure everyone understood the question. On one hand, Chazal talk many places about how elevated and important tefillah is. Tefillah is described as a davar sha'omed berumo shel olam, something that's the highest thing in the world. And tragically, b'nei adam mizalzelin, people think it's nothing. They waste it. They denigrate it. Now, on the other hand, there is a Maimer Chazal that's very interesting. It talks about something called iyun tefillah as being something bad. Iyun tefillah meaning spending too much time praying for your things to be granted. Now, I think the answer to what you're asking is really Taisus himself asked a similar question, because the Gemara is mashma that something called iyun tefillah is bad, and yet we say every day, Elu Dvarim, that you get benefit in this world, and one of them is iyun tefillah. So is iyun tefillah good or is iyun tefillah bad? So it all depends what iyun tefillah is. So Tosfos answers, there are two types of iyun tefillah. If iyun tefillah means have kavana and be sincere and open your heart to Hashem, that's kabbalic. That's the greatest thing. But if iyun tefillah means you are absolutely convinced Hashem is going to give you what you ask for if you just keep on asking. So it says in such a situation, that's an improper attitude, because a person has to know that they're not always going to be zocha, and Hashem has his own decision making, and you shouldn't be taila that your tefillah for sure is going to be answered, because chas v'shalom, if it's not answered, you may lose your amuna in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I think the short answer is have kavana, and have hope, but don't assume it's a done deal that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give you exactly what you want, because that's not always the case, right? So you have two inyanim of iyun tefillah.
Sometimes people have co-funds, and the co-fund is a positive influence that they make them more form.
Yeah.
In that case, you should pick up, or what do you?
Okay, I think we're almost finished. No. Yeah, it's a good. It is a very good question. The issue of girlfriends. So all I will tell you is, halacha is halacha. But I'll tell you a Maaser with Rav Steinman, the great Rav Steinman, Zichrono Livracha, where there was a bacher in Bnei Brak who was a little off the derech. I think it was a Shomer Shabbos. He wasn't legamri off the derech, but he had a girlfriend. And the parents were very concerned that this was improper. And they went to Rav Steinman. And the long and short of the story was that Rav Steinman said, this bacher is doing much better in Ruchnius because of his connection to this young lady than he would be without. And he says, B'chi Gavne, it was kedai not to force him, even if you could force him, to discontinue the relationship. Now, this is very tricky, because obviously, what do we mean relationship? Relationship itself can exist on many levels, from occasionally talking to each other to, chas v'shalom, chiyuvei kares of nida and the like. So I don't think Rav Steinman was permitting the extremes, but Rav Steinman was makir that sometimes a girlfriend might possibly be a positive influence on a person, and we've seen it. But it's a very delicate issue. And again, I shouldn't open my mouth, because the last thing I want to do is encourage people to be porates, gedarim of tznius. But I can tell you that at least achar ha'maisa, there are sometimes benefits in those types of relationships. But you try to obviously keep it within very strong halachic boundaries, not to do things that are mamish, iser d'oraisis. Yeah.
I think a lot of times in Pnimiyut Torah, and also even in Kabbalah too, there are certain concepts that will almost like sound like foreign concepts that like sound like Christian concepts to some extent.
Yeah.
And like for example, I learned recently that at least the Ramchal and like brings down that just like there are sphirot of kedusha, there's also sphirot of tumah to some extent. And it's true. So whenever and other things also, and whenever I hear these things, it rubs me the wrong way. And I want to know, is it? I mean, I guess I don't know which one comes first, but like, is there any source for how to some extent how one impacted the other?
Yeah, well, Kabbalah is, besides the inherent difficulty of Kabbalah, but Kabbalah is a very controversial limud. For example, there are those who say, if one is not maimin in Kabbalah, there are not bikoris. And there are those who say, if you believe in Kabbalah, you are not bikoris. Because the whole world of Kabbalah talks about spheros, different dimensions, so chas v'shalom, multiplicity of God, different aspects of God, even sexual union. I mean, a Kabbalah will say that how do you bring bracha into the world? That is when you unite the Zeir Anpin with the Nukva. I mean, they basically describe the unification of the spheros using a sexual term. Like God is having relations somehow, and it creates bracha into the world. So the short answer is, and every sefer says this, the Ramchal, I mean, every sefer Kabbalah says this, that these are mishalim that we don't really understand. They are using metaphors, mishalim, that are designed to express certain spiritual truths. And most people, even if they learn Kabbalah, only know the mashal, and they don't know the nimshal, which is one of the reasons why Kabbalah is often discouraged, precisely because you may get the wrong ideas. So it's not, so when I said before, if you believe in Kabbalah, you are not bikoros, I didn't mean if you believe in true Kabbalah, but if you take the superficial understanding and you look at multiplicity and the like, then your understanding of Kabbalah could very easily be apikoros and the like. So it is very, very difficult. On one hand, the Vilna Gaon says, the Gra says, it's quoted in the Even Shlema, that as we approach Mashiach, the Geula will come only in the merit of Limud HaKabbalah, the Gra says. And that is why we find, as we approach Mashiach, more and more people are learning different aspects of Kabbalah. So it's considered to be positive, but you also have to be careful to understand that these are mishalim. These are not to be taken as literally as it sounds.
Did they impact each other, like historically? Did they have any, did Christianity impact, I don't want to say God forbid, Kabbalah,
Well, yeah, there actually are Christian. There is a Christian Kabbalah. There is, you can look up. You can better look up in Wikipedia. I guess I don't know for sure. Christian Kabbalah. They use the word Kabbalah as well. In fact, it's interesting. I heard, this anti-Semite who's now very notorious, Nick Fuentes. Have you come across him? So he's very knowledgeable about Yiddish. It's kind of bizarre. But he was giving a whole drasha about Shviras HaKelim and Kabbalah, whatever it is. He was giving a whole drasha on this. But there were Christian Kabbalists. Now again, though, this is where the academic approach is different than I think a Maimon. Academics are always saying this borrowed from this, and this borrowed from this, and the Jews borrowed from the Christians, and the Christians borrowed from the Jews. As Maminim, we try not to say that. I mean, Christians may have gotten it from the Jews, but we don't want to say the Arizal or the Rav Moshe Cordovero or the Shalom HaKadosh that they got their ideas from Christianity. I think that would be a great, great pagam in the covet of their Gedolim. So I think from our perspective, I think we would say the influences only went in one direction. We would not be makabel that.
Because we came first.
And we were first. That's 100% true. Now, I did say, although I'm getting some flack on this, that there may be certain minhagei Yisrael later that may, I'm not saying yes for sure, may have an origin in Christianity. I had mentioned the possibility of the Shlisel Chala, although I'm going to get another email on that, which that's where you bake the key, whatever it is. So some say, again, I'm not saying, but some say that may be. So I acknowledge that over time there may have been kilkulim from folk traditions, but not among our Gedalim. Among, when you talk about the Arizal, the Ramak, we would have to say it comes Kulo Kodesh from Hashem. Yeah.
Why can't we daven for like predetermined events? If Hashem knows the future and He knows what we're going to daven for, He could just set up the future in a way that fits with what we daven for. As long as, let's say, we don't know what happened, we don't know the outcome.
In other words, it happened already, but you don't know.
Yeah, that's like the story in Gemara, maybe about a house on fire.
So the Mishnah says, if you come to a city and you hear somebody screaming like they were a victim of a murder or a crime, so you can't say Yehi Ratzain that it's not my family, because it already happened. If it already happened, so it either is or isn't. It's not shaykh for a tefillah to change that which already happened, right? This is a Mishnah. Atzayek l'sha'avar harezu tefillah shav. So you're asking the kasha, if nobody knows, then Akash Baruch Hu could change it. I hear, but I think the answer might be that even though nobody knows, but bi'etzem, that would be a neis nigla, meaning it would be a neis nigla because it would be a supernatural occurrence. So that's nichlal in not being soymech on a neis.
I don't mean for it to change. I mean, Hashem will just Lemafreya have set it up in a way that it fits with what you're davening for. Since Hashem knows before you.
Yeah, but so you're saying Hashem should answer your tefillah before you get it, and as He knows, well, there's such a terem yikrav aniyena before you would. Yeah, but b'derech klal, the concept would be that Hashem answers tefillah. You don't make a cheshbon that Hashem says, "Oh, since you're going to daven next week, therefore."
I find some story in maybe not that somebody got a bracha to have a kid, and then they had it like very close after the bracha because of the bracha, but that would obviously require in the past that they became pregnant. I don't know.
Okay, I don't. In other words, they didn't need a pregnancy. I mean, there was no 9 months. Yeah. Now let me tell you a little story. I'll end here. Our founding Rosh Yeshiva was Rav Nata Schiller and then Rav Mendel Weinbach, who was nifter a few years before that, Zichrono Livracha, and he lost a son in an accident, and he once recounted the story that when he got news from the hospital that they think it was his son, and they wanted him to identify the body. So it's interesting. His instinct was, although it's verkehrt from the Mishnah, he wanted to be mispalel that it wouldn't be his son, which is l'chara you can't do. But the point I want to make is a different point. He then said he didn't want to do that, because if he would be mispalel, it wouldn't be his son. It would be somebody else's son. So what type of tefillah is that? I want my son to live, so your son should die, he says. So because of that, not because of the Mishnah and Brachas, because of that, he says he didn't want to be mispalel, that it shouldn't be his son. Because, my Shana, he shouldn't say his son's life is more precious than any son's life. Okay, thank you. Be well, and
thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.